Welcome to Conversations with Craig. I'm Craig DeRoche, the president and CEO of the Family Policy Alliance. Reminder, as you're watching this and sharing it with us, we want you to like it. We want you to share. We want you to ask questions and share your comments in the feed. We will see those. We'll respond to them as we can, but we want to grow the community because we've got a lot of great things to talk about, especially on this show with a special guest. The nation is still celebrating the victories for families last week at the ballot box, especially in the much watched Virginia race. Family policy issues, especially education and parental rights, took front and center, and especially near the end of the election cycle, culminating in some very important victories in Virginia. Now, I'm grateful to be joined by Victoria Cobb, the president of the Family Foundation in Virginia, which is the Commonwealth's largest and oldest family organization. The Family Foundation plays a key role in Virginia family policy, including in issues that have taken front and center, that have really swept beyond Virginia throughout our whole country. And that's something that is a refreshing change for a lot of parents that have been worried about their kids, particularly since the onset of the shutdowns and COVID. Victoria has been in the organization for over 20 years, and she served as president for over 15 of those years. She's a very in-demand speaker, as you'd guess, and the recipient of many awards. And in the Family Policy Alliance, she's a longtime friend. Please join me in welcoming Victoria to the show. Victoria?
Thanks for having me. Enjoy getting to talk with you today. It's a fun thing to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So catch us up. What's happening in Virginia, to the families? What have they been experiencing over the particularly last couple of years, but for maybe longer than that, leading up to this election? What set off the parents and families in Virginia?
Well, it really has been, in particular, the last couple of years that families have been working on trying to flourish under what has been very liberal, very really one-party driven politics. And so we've just seen a host of policies that have absolutely devastated families. And, it's everything from, we watched 30 plus years of pro-life policies get erased all in one bill. So the unborn are no longer protected the way they should be here in Virginia. The education policy is probably what we're going to talk about the most, but we saw a lot of changes in that department, and even attacks on our very small school choice program. We've been trying to hang on to even allowing some folks to have options outside the public school. And then for people of faith, I think there have been unusual levels of just animosity coming from our government. And that comes in the form of things like we passed something called the Virginia Values Act 2 years ago. And what that did was do basically what you've probably heard about with the Equality Act at the federal level. A lot of folks know about that, and they've been trying to fight that from becoming law at the federal level. But we did it here in Virginia. What that did is it said, we're going to elevate sexual orientation, gender identity above everything else. And we're going to call it discrimination if you think those things matter, even in our churches and Christian schools when you're employing people of faith. And so this is a really alarming trend. And so we have been hoping for a turnaround.
So, and you raise all these important issues. It goes beyond just the parents and the curriculum, for sure. And there's been this big change in Virginia. We'll get to the election next beyond the governor's race. But I just want our audience to understand, when she says the Equality Act, it sounds funny when we say the Equality Act is something that families wouldn't like to see. It's because what politicians do, I'm a recovering politician myself, what they like to do is they like to say it's a massive tax increase. What the politicians would do is they'd say the Tax Cut Act of 2021 while they're doubling your taxes, and it's just a trick. The bill that was passed that Virginia is talking about, and the one being debated, as you know from watching this show, actually is the opposite of equality. It takes people away from being equal American citizens, and it ranks people based on certain behaviors or other characteristics. It asks to judge people based on the content of the color of their skin rather than their character, for example, or to make a metaphor, only from me. But so our viewers understand what we're talking about here. So one of the things that the secular and the government type people that have had their thumbs on the parents and the families there are already doing, Victoria, is already saying, so what? What can the governor do? Really, it's not that big of a loss. I think those are fighting words. I think that that's exactly why the parents and families are rising up right now. What do you expect them to lead with? The governor, the other political leaders, what changes do you think are possible in Virginia that will matter to families?
Well, our governor-elect Youngkin gave a long list of what he wanted to do. Literally, he would say on day one. Now, we all know it can't all be done on day one, but I'll give you some examples of things that really do matter. He said immediately he's going to fire our superintendent of education. Well, that's the top issue that parents went to the polls for. And so it really, personnel is policy, and most people know that. When you have folks that have a bad agenda in your political appointments, that's a big deal. So he's going to immediately start rooting out the places where we've seen both the transgender model guidelines. We can talk a little bit more about that in detail, and how that impacts the classroom, what they did here in Virginia. But that and this critical issue of critical race theory that people have been talking about. Why are we all of a sudden inserting race issues, not simply as a better way of talking about history, but something much deeper. So he's immediately saying, I am going to address these things. In fact, he's gone another step and said, Virginia is a terrible place for charter schools. Why do we only have 8 charter schools in our Commonwealth? Well, it's because there are bad laws around it. And he wants to go after those to basically create more freedom for parents to make choices.
So this is great news, because a lot of people listening into the show, that's what they wonder about. Politicians run on something, but can they actually do something concrete? Everything you just said, and a lot of it's within the governor's power to do it, and that's going to be refreshing. But you also said there's a lot of work to do, because there's policies that are bad policies that need to be changed, like the charter schools and so much else. Well, the governor's not going to be alone in doing this, and praise God for this. There were other races in Virginia that were affected by this rising up of parents and families about family policy. Can you tell us about some of the other changes that in the governance of the Commonwealth? I got to stop calling it a state. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, of what happened?
Yeah, we actually had conservatives not just win the governor's office, but they actually won the lieutenant governor's office, the attorney general, and we got conservative control back in our House of Delegates, which is a big deal. Most of the bad ideas that we have seen over the last 2 years originated out of the House of Delegates. So we're going to cut off the bad ideas and hopefully move forward with some good ideas. Now, I have to tell people our Senate is 20-20 on a lot of issues. It's 21-19 in a partisan divide. The Democrats hold the majority in a very technical manner. But on issues of life, for example, it is 20-20. We have a pro-life Democrat. So it's going to be, what can we get done that works with those individuals? So there's a lot of things that we want to restore that got lost over the last 2 years. There are a lot of things that need to move forward that I think it is going to take work, but I think can be done.
So, and I agree with you. And those are the pieces of the puzzle. And I think that if I was in the Senate in Virginia, I'd be really concerned about voting no on these good policies that the parents and families, that Biden voters, quite frankly, not a small percentage, like 2 or 3 people in the Commonwealth voted for Biden and voted to usher in this change. It was like 9% of Biden's voters. So this is a bipartisan uprising. And it's for family policies that protect our children and advance their opportunities. And one of the neat things, I think I might know the answer to this, but Victoria, when I introduced you, I let our audience know how experienced you are. You're really a national leading voice. People come to you for a lot of things. Your Commonwealth happens to surround the District of Columbia, so you do have a lot of national leaders that are part of the movement there in Virginia. What do you think the results in Virginia, do they have implications nationally for real, or is that just hype for a couple of days? What are your thoughts of the success and victories that you just experienced, Virginia just experienced? You got to lead with the Family Foundation, one of the best organizations in America. If you haven't supported them yet, all of the listeners need to support them. What do you think this is going to do to the national discussion going into 2022?
Virginia has always been seen as a bellwether state. So, because we're the off year, as they call it, we're always sort of, what does this mean for the midterms? And I would say, yes, it was a great signal, not just for our Commonwealth and the direction we want to go, but I think the beginning of something we might see nationwide next year. We saw change from top to bottom in Virginia. It wasn't just conservative counties came out in larger numbers. It was also counties that have been historically more liberal came out with many, many more conservative voters. And I think we're going to see that as long as we continue to stick to being the party that cares about the kids and cares about education and cares actually about the environment in schools. That was a major contributing factor too. We had issues that have become nationwide in Loudoun County over sexual assault in bathrooms. Well, there were policies that made that happen, which is that we actually issued a transgender model policy that every school was supposed to adopt in Virginia. And it did threaten the safety of kids because it stopped mattering whether someone was a biological girl or boy, and they got to enter private spaces that should be places that are safe for people. And so those issues aren't just Virginia specific, they're everywhere. And I think parents everywhere want to know that their kids are, for heaven's sakes, safe in school, let alone focused on reading, writing, and math, which we know has almost been shelved for ideological things. So I think we'll see great things across the country.
And I agree with you, and I'm excited to hear you just affirm that for people. What I think a lot of people knew in their heart, that clearly family policy issues made a difference here. Clearly, parents and kids and families are rising up across political lines because they don't want to put their kids at risk. And at the Family Foundation, we all know you're busy. Obviously, you've been busy this year. We when I say we, I'm talking about the audience. I'm talking about people that have nothing to do with politics, or maybe even people that don't vote. They're aware of what the Family Foundation in Virginia was doing in Loudoun County specifically, but in other school districts in Virginia over this past year. That you have weathered the storm. You've taken the arrows and the rocks that people throw at your head while you're advancing the civil rights of families. What are some of the ways in which you do that? Tell us about the environment. Tell us what that's like. I tell our team that sometimes, that the people that are advancing civil rights are the ones that people badmouth and investigate and cancel. Look at the civil rights movement of the 60s, not the ones that get night commercials. So it's tough what you're doing at the Family Foundation. But tell us, what's that work like? What are some of the things that you've been able to do?
Well, I would say this past year, we have been really focused on the education issue and the environment. And when we tried desperately to block this model transgender policies in the General Assembly, but when we lost, that became a local issue. And we set out a plan. It was called Protect Every Kid. It was a campaign that we ran. And we basically said, local school districts are the ones charged with protecting every kid, not just a few kids, but really making sure their policies matter and work for everyone. And so we literally picked out counties where we were going to go in and give the school board the backbone to say no to what the state was handing down. And so we would go county to county and actually really get the parents to create this uprising and help the school board make the right decision. And so all of those kind of things then kind of became this, what you see on the news feels organic, and it is to some degree, but it's also the fact that people are really trying to drive change in their local school board, and the Family Foundation is kind of helping them put concrete words and ideas behind what they're trying to communicate. And we're working with the policymakers in every county. And so that's a lot of what we've been up to over the last year. And we're really excited that it ended up playing a direct role actually in this election, even though we think of it is really focused on families and policy. But it's interesting how these things do tend to come together. People who like to not be political, and I understand that completely, but they do impact each other, right? So when we want to fix things for our kids, we also need the right people in the right spots. And so it's interesting how it all played so carefully together this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think these issues are important. And you brought up, and I think we should pause here. I'm fighting in my head with what I want to hit first. What I want to hit first is the family policy councils, state and Commonwealth organizations like the Family Foundation. Victoria and the Family Foundation in Virginia, wonderful organization. We have the link. You'll see it off to the right. Click on, learn about them, get involved, especially if you live in Virginia. but we have organizations in 39 other states in America that are doing this right now. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. We take what's going on at a federal and a national level. That's what Family Policy Alliance focuses on, is nationalizing issues so our state organizations can speak into the federal issues, because that's where the federal representatives are elected. They can speak into the state and the local levels to actually not phone it in or fly it in from Washington, D.C., but to have genuine people involved in sticking up for their kids. I just wanted to state that, and I do hope you support. If you say, boy, Virginia is a long way away, I'm listening from New Mexico and Illinois. I see people will be in this call. I want you to click on the links, get involved with your state organization, because they're doing the same thing the Family Foundation is doing, God willing, in your state as well. But back to the transgender policy. This is something, again, as I said, when you're sticking up for the civil rights of somebody, you're often called a bigot, you're called horrifying names and the rest of it. But this really comes back to common sense, and it comes back to public safety. Buried in those bills are things like a male prisoner can say that he wants a female cellmate. A male can say that they want to go to a domestic violence shelter. A kid in high school, as they did in Loudoun County, who's a boy who intends women harm. In all those three situations I just said, there is no guard to protect the women. It is simply saying it's what the person says they are, and you open the door by law, or they have an action, a civil rights violation, if they don't get access to harm that person. And people said that was alarmist, that was crazy, that would never happen, and it was judgy and all these other things. But, it happened, Victoria. It happened exactly what people said. And the ACLU, which was a loud voice, for this, one of the areas I agreed with the ACLU on FOIA, freedom of information, transparency is the best cleanser for bad government. They're actively filing lawsuit after lawsuit to prevent California and Washington from publishing how many women are being raped in prison by men when they transfer them there. They're trying to cover these things up. And isn't that exactly what happened in Loudoun County? They were contemplating passing this transgender policy, and they said, well, we can't have people know what boys are actually going to do to girls if we pass this policy, so we'll cover it up. And isn't that exactly what happened?
It's exactly what happened. And every school board that we went to, we would almost be called alarmists. We'd be told it's such a ridiculous hypothetical. And we would always say, and they make it sound like we were saying that transgender students themselves are harmful. And we'd say, no, this is about the policy. When you make bad policy, you invite bad actors of all sorts into that bad policy. And so when it finally happened in Loudoun, it's not that we were surprised at all. And it's devastating because that is someone's daughter. And in fact, actually twice in Loudoun County, but we knew that was the case. And especially because our model policies went so far as to say teachers shouldn't be questioning people walking into bathrooms at all. So you literally have everyone taught to look the other way, even if they feel like something harmful could happen. It's unacceptable to parents that that's the kind of environment their child goes to school in.
And that's why I think that, and this is a connection that's being made when people talk about these foreign policies from far off places. They talk about tax policies that even get the commentators and the so-called experts tangled up in knots. It's just common sense. This is why parents and families are rising up, and I think that's what's caught the left off guard. They want to tell people that they wanted to force feed this down America's throat to make good on campaign promises for their donors or something. But I saw a poll where even 38% of Democrats support these policies. 18% of independents support their policies. They haven't sold anybody yet, and so it's just a thank you, for what you're doing. And you've been experienced, Victoria. You've been in this movement for a long time. You've been the president of the organization now for 15 years. You've seen a lot of good. You've seen a lot of bad. You've seen a lot of ugly. Kind of tell us what you've seen in your experience. I want our audience to get to know you, but also tell us with what's going on right now. Is this a big swing for family policy? Is this going in the right direction, or is this happen every 2 or 3 years, what we're seeing out there right now? Put it into perspective what we're experiencing.
I would say for Virginia, this is a really big deal. And that's because people had written our state off as being permanently liberal. We hadn't elected a conservative to a statewide office since 2009. So it's fair that those arguments said, wait, you're only electing liberals and they're setting liberal policy, and that's the dictate of the will of the people. And so this is a big deal because it's reversing course on a pretty long trend. It's only been a couple of years where it's been liberalism at every turn, from governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, House of Delegates, Senate, but it's been trending that way for a while. So this is like the first kind of course correction, and it's a big one, and it really matters. And I would say this, there's another sub trend that isn't being talked about, but we're seeing it, which is the church is rising up. We have seen more church engagement this year than ever before. We were in the middle of COVID, so we couldn't do some of our big events, but what we did instead was we did this 23 city church event tour where we met with groups that could only be 25 people large because we had such ridiculous mandates on our state. But we met with 25 pastors here and 25 pastors there. And I'm telling you, they were becoming aware of how harmful these policies were to their congregations. They knew people sitting in their pews last year could counsel kids who struggled with gender dysphoria or with sexual orientation questions. And now their Christian counselors are illegal. They knew they had public school teachers being driven out of the public schools because they were going to have to violate their conscience. So when you see that, and now you see pastors actually being willing to speak up, being willing to say something, being willing to have the Family Foundation in front of their entire congregations to talk about these issues, those things turn the knob. They move the needle, and I think you can see it in this election.
Well, and we're seeing the same thing everywhere, and we're also seeing it. And I think the folks that thought they could just force religion, not out of the policies in America, out of the public square, and now they're trying to force it out of the hearts and minds and souls of people too. And they thought people would just go along willingly with that. But I think maybe, Victoria, I'll ask you your opinion. Could we agree that this is not, if you put this into the beginning, middle, and end, we're not in the middle or the end here. This is just the beginning of having family policy being a front page issue in America. It was mocked when Dan Quayle brought up family values in the 80s, and politicians have been quiet from both parties for a long time. But do you think it's fair to say that in our nation that this is a beginning for families to finally have a voice, whether it's in the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, if it's a school board, the state legislature, governors, all the way up to the President of the United States? Is that the right way to read this? We're just getting started?
I've even seen the media having to admit this past week that parents are now their own interest group. I've seen the articles that say, look, you can't avoid the culture war. We've had certain politicians try to say that that's all made up, that the culture wars are like our imagination. I think you've seen those things too. But I think the reality is they now realize it's not a figment of our imagination. And there's a lot of people upset about what is being really done to our children. Our children are the victim of these bad policies, and everybody is seeing that play out. They are told to be confused about their gender by Hollywood and now in our schools. That's not acceptable to the average parent. The average parent is trying to do right by their kid. And when there are government officials stepping in between and saying, oh, by the way, we don't really even need you to know about what's going on with your children. That was a big issue in Virginia too, was blocking parents out of the knowledge of what's happening in the schools. And so, yes, I think this is the beginning of something very significant. And I believe that parents need to just keep on driving the car when it comes to their kids. They are the one that should be in the driver's seat over their child's, what they learn, what environment they're in. And honestly, the most important piece of that is parents being able to make a decision. Is my local assigned public school the right place for my child? And we've got to get in Virginia to a place where every parent, regardless of their income, gets to make that decision. We are only a fraction of where we need to be. And I hope that this election really drives the fact home that every parent deserves that, no matter what their income is, and that we can do better.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think our audience knows now why I led the show talking about Victoria's leadership and her voice and why people look to her for those things. She's a mama bear. I think 4 children, right?
Yep,
4 young children.
Yep.
She's raising, and one of the smartest and most experienced political and policy minds on family policy. So this is just the beginning. And we always close this segment with just a brief, and you just gave us a lot of encouragement, but leave us with just a point or two about what we need to be encouraged about as we wrap up our time here together.
Well, I think this should encourage every parent that they can take their concerns to the school board, they can take their concerns to the governor, they can take them to the ballot box, and that they can be successful. And so I hope that everybody walks away with this feeling like, hey, they actually did that in Virginia, that was trending all the wrong direction, that was passing terrible things. If they can do that, wherever you are in the country, you can do that too. And so, elections are at different times, but it's not just elections, it's being engaged all year round. It's actually paying attention to what your kids are learning and being willing to say the hard thing to the teacher, being willing to have the meeting with the principal, being willing to call the school board out when they need to be called out. But I think people should be encouraged. It works. It can be done.
What a great way to wrap the show. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you for that encouragement. Thank you for your leadership. May God bless you and the Family Foundation, all those, because I know it's not just you and your staff, it's thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of volunteers and thousands of churches. So we are encouraged. And thank you for being on the show. And we'll talk again real soon. And if you watched it, we want you to share this, like it, and comment for your friends.
Thanks for having me.